Agutavach, and welcome to this shiur, Muktzah Shabbos Sisa. I want to dedicate the shiur tonight, the Dayan Levi Yitzchok Rabbi Paris should have a refuah shalema or kreva. Let's go straight into our Shacharis. So, someone asked me at the beginning of the week about wearing a gartel for bentsching. Now, the bottom quote which you have here is from Sefer HaMinhagim Chabad. Hanasuim noihagim lispalul kol hatfilos bechagiras avnet. Once we're married, so it is customary to daven, I guess Shacharis Michamayev, Kishu Shalamita, I guess also wearing a gartel. Similarly, when performing various mitzvahs, but not all mitzvahs. And the Rebbe leaves it as an open question. What's the criterion why some mitzvahs we do wear a gartel? For example, when we bench Chanukah licht, we would wear a gartel, some others not. Okay. Particularly now going to the union of gartel for benching. So we do have the idea that brought in Chazal of when sitting down to eat, actually to undo your belt, to loosen your belt. And here, from this sefer which you have on the screen, it's a Bach quoted in a sefer, which you see on the note in note 1 is a sefer Tehillas Chaim. It's talking about the Tzanzurov, the Divrei Chaim. But so there he refers to a Bach somewhere in Hilchas Berachos Hamazon, somewhere around also Chasuda. So he has the posuk ve'ekcho fas lechem. That posuk is when Avraham Avinu says, "I'm going to bring bread to serve the visitors, malochim, who looked like travelers." So the word ve'ekcho, so he takes the word ekcho, and he says, read the letters Hey, Ches, Kuf, Aleph, take it back to front. Hater chagura koidem achila, loosen your belt before eating. Pas lechem is a Rosh Tevos, pen Toivelled lidei me'ayim, lest you will come to have a stomachache. Okay, so we have here a remez to the idea that before you start eating, you loosen your belt. And also, whoever's learned Gemara Shabbos talks about Mish Yaschir, when the beginning of a Suda, when is the beginning of a Suda? In reference to when you have to be mafsik or not, what's the beginning of a Suda? So it says that Mishayatim Balabayat Chagura. So the normal behavior would be to loosen your belt when you sit down to eat. But when it comes to benching, I couldn't find very much evidence, one way or the other. I have seen people putting on a gartel for benching, but I don't know whether they have a Kabbalah, a Mezuzah from previous Chassidim. What we have here is reference to the Koloshitzer Rebbe and the Shinyever Rebbe. They were both sons, if I'm not mistaken, of the Divrei Chaim, that they would make a point of putting on their gartel for benching. So that's Yechidei Segula. That doesn't make it something which applies to everyone. So I don't have any Mokir Dafka to put on a gartel for benching. And the Svara is, since you've loosened your belt for a particular reason, you're still sitting, it would make sense just to continue the way you are. I would like to add, though, I did see there's a beautiful sefer, Sipurei Hisvaduyos, or something like that, of Rabbi Greenglass. And there, Rabbi Greenglass, he didn't mince his words. When he needed to say something, he would say. And he would say to the Talmidim that when they're eating, they should be wearing their jacket. Perhaps hat and jacket, I don't remember. Again, it's something which I haven't seen many people particular about this. Shabbos meal is an andazach. Shabbos meal is out of covet for the Shabbos meal, so that's when many people would wear, not wearing their kapota, they would wear a special tishbekesha to out of covet for the Shabbos meal. Let's move on. Interesting question. Does a keli which hasn't been Toivelled, does it have a din of Muktzah? So you got a gift of a set of cutlery there somewhere, and you want to put them somewhere else. Not let's say good for you. It is whatever. Is there a Muktzah about cutlery or which is especially mentioned cutlery, because metalware is for sure chayiv tvila. A glass is also chayiv midrabanon, whereas crockery is lav davka. So that's why I'm focusing something which is for sure chayiv tvila. Does the fact that it's not been toivelled, and therefore you can't use it, does it make it muktzah? So I was intrigued with the question, and the closest parallel we have is about a garment which is shatnez. And this Alter Rebbe does talk about in the dinim of Muktzah, in the Siman Shin Ches, towards the end of the Siman, very long Siman, and he talks about Muktzah, about shatnez. The first opinion says that shatnez is Muktzah because it's not fit for any use. Others say it's a keli, and it's just that you can't use it, but it's a keli. And then he concludes, though, that the shatnez, the garment of shatnez, is muktzah. The fact that you can use a shatnez jacket to cover over a piece of equipment, that doesn't make it. That's not what it's made for. So therefore, the main because it's not usable for its main purpose, therefore the shatnez jacket is muktzah. So, despite that, in the Piskei Tshuvos, in the same area, so he addresses this question about untoivelled kalim, and he says, since you could give it away, what's the solution? When many times people get stuck, they have a new keli, and for whether because it's electrical, electronic, or because there's no mikva available, so the short-term solution, at least, for an untoivelled keli is to give it to a goy and to borrow it back. So he says, since you could give this cutlery to a goy and borrow it back, as mentioned Mishnah Berurah in Shin Chav Gimel, and therefore it's usable on Shabbos, there is a way to use it, and therefore he says it's not muktzah. It's interesting. I'm not totally convinced, but fine. Okay, we have a svara to say that untoivelled kalim are more usable than shatnez, because shatnez, there's nothing you can do with it for its main purpose. You can't wear it. Even if you give it to go, you still can't wear it. Whereas whereas the cutlery, which is untoivelled, you could, even on Shabbos, if you needed it for Shabbos, you could give it to a goy. Someone's asking, you can't give gifts on Shabbos, so that's why I just mentioned. If you needed, if it's for achila on Shabbos, you can give a gift which is needed for eating on Shabbos. Let's move on. Another cute question. Someone asked me at the beginning of the week that their kids brought home from New York a set of glasses, and when you pour in cold liquid, very cold liquid, it'll turn from blue to purple. And then to add to the mix, we have here a kind of spoon which is used for feeding children, and when you put it in hot food, it will turn white, and so you'll know that the food is too hot to feed to the baby. So again, you can use those for Shabbos. Then one time my children bought me a mug, and it was one of those which is black on the outside, and when you pour in a cup of coffee, when you pour in hot water, so then that picture comes up or writing comes up. By the way, if you get a black mug for Shlachmonis, before you give it on to the next person, check it out, because it might be a personalized gift for you with some message hiding behind the black surface. Okay, so now let's come back to the halacha here. So this is again from the Sefer Piskei Tshuvos, and he has a whole discussion also got to do with photogray lenses. It says if it's b'derech gromo, if it's not direct. So he gives the example of mishkafayim, of the glasses, then that's okay to wear your photogray lenses and they change color when you walk in the sunlight. But if you are doing it more directly, so you put it, you remember, I was speaking to the class the other day about these celluloid strips. If you remember, about 25 years ago, they had this kind of thermometer, which was a plastic strip, and you put it on your forehead, and then it would change color and it'd tell you whether you've got temperature or not. So to use those kind of things, and so this kind of idea that as soon as you touch it, it changes color. So he's more concerned about that. He says you shouldn't do. and this is news for me. It looks like there's some kind of baby's nappies, which when they get wet, they change color. Brilliant idea. So again, I don't know who's the question for, though. Is the question for the child? I don't really understand who's the Machal Shabbos. The baby is making wet. I don't understand the question, but never mind. But to make something by immediate reaction changes color, he is concerned. More important is if the heat will bring out letters or pictures. So that is more of a problem, and one should avoid using such a thing. Back in the day, we used to do invisible writing with lemon juice on paper, and then you put the paper near the radiator, and then the letters would turn brown. So to do that on Shabbos would not be allowed, because you are bringing out letters. And similarly, the mug, which I just described before, to pour in hot water, and that's going to bring out a picture, or that's going to bring out certainly if you could bring out writing, that would be also because of creating a temporary writing. He goes further, if you are not interested about the change of color, then that's not a problem. So coming back to our examples, these l'chaim glasses, I don't think there's any interest after in the change of color. It's cute, but that's about it. And therefore, it's not a problem to use them on Shabbos. I think with these spoons, which they are designed to be able to tell you the temperature of the food, it's something I think which you should be avoiding to use on Shabbos. And as he says, unless b'makom chayli or tzorech gadol, but normally I think that's something which should be avoided, because there is an interest in the change of color, and it happens immediately. As I said before already, the mugs which can come up and a message comes up because it's filled with hot liquid, that kind of mug shouldn't be used on Shabbos. Let's move on. Right. So one of our Anash here asked me a question. There is a thing about if you touch shoes, this is Shulchan Aruch in Siman Dalet. In the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, we have the first 4 simonim are in. There's two versions, because at a later stage the Alter Rebbe started revising the Shulchan Aruch, and we have of that second edition we have 3.5 simonim. So Siman Dalet is not complete in the second version, the Madura Basra, but this is from the Madura Kama, from the first version. He says the following: He has a list of activities which will warrant that you wash your hands with water. It's not enough just to rub it on a stiff surface which would wipe away the soil. You don't need to wash negelwasser 3 times, but actually some of them we are generally particular. So for example, he says hakom mahamita, when you get out of bed. So then we are generally knowing to do wash negelwasser, coming out from Beis HaKisei and Beis HaMerchetz, to cutting nails, we know to wash negelwasser after cutting nails. Hachoylitz min olav b'yad, and one who removes his shoes with his hands. So the question here is, what is the is this dafka leather shoes, or is it non-leather shoes also? Before I forget, I want to tell you a story which I heard from, I think, from Rabbi Beryl Chaikin, Zol Zayin Gesund. It's for Malcolm, Muktzah Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe would say Torah for his Talmidim. So he had the Talmidim of the Chadorim who were great Geoinim, and then he had Poshatid. And there was a session where he would say the deep Torah, and then he had separate sessions where he would say Poshat Torah. And to the deep Torah, the Poshat people weren't allowed, and to the Poshat Torah, the Gross Chassidim weren't allowed. One of the Chassidim, one of the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, he was curious. He wanted to hear the Poshat Torah. And so he agreed with the Gabe. And, the Alter Rebbe not always would give 3 weeks notice. It was sometimes it would be rather impromptu. So he asked the Gabe, next time the Rebbe is going to say Poshat Torah, let me know. So it was one afternoon, and Rabbi Binyamin had a little nap, and knock on the door. The Rebbe gets on Poshat Torah. So he rushes out, jumps out, runs along to the Beis Medrash, hides under a bench. And then the Poshta didn't come in. Then the Alter Rebbe eventually comes in. And the Alter Rebbe starts saying, you have the 7 nations of Canaan, you have Achiti, Voemoiri. What's a Chiti? Chiti is being frightened. Sometimes people are frightened of things they shouldn't be frightened of. Voemoiri has got to do with saying. Sometimes you have to be careful what you say. Sometimes people say things we shouldn't be saying. And then the Alter Rebbe stopped. And he says, I can sense an impure smell in the room. And Rabbi Yomi was sussed out, and he was asked to leave. So we don't know the rest of that Poshta Torah. But meanwhile, the story is that he had been, if you notice, he had been napping, and he hadn't washed Nagelwasser when he got up from his nap because he was rushing. He didn't really. So that's a story about washing Nagelwasser. Even if you have nap during the day, you don't have to wash next to your bed, but you should wash at Nagelwasser. Okay, now. So coming back to our point here, our question is touching non-leather shoes the same as leather shoes? It seems to be a little bit of a ruchnisdika thing, but the fact is the poskim who understood this halacha, they say that it doesn't apply to socks, but he says, bichlal zeh, he says, if you have shoes or slippers, if they do get dirty, so then if you touch them, you should be washing your hands. Very, very interesting. Tonight, after Shabbos, we were watching the Living Torah, and the Rebbe was talking about the shiur, and he says how the shiur is, before you do the avodah, the kohen has to wash his hands and feet. Why dafka those organs have to be washed? And he says, because those are the organs where you engage with the world, where you have to do your touching, your hands obviously touching. And he says, even in Loshen, he says, really, it should have been in the Mokem HaKodesh. The legs took him out of the Mokem HaKodesh. So therefore, the legs which are in contact with impurity, therefore his feet have to be washed by the shiur. So coming back, so the shoes which are used for wearing outside and they pick up dirt, they would, if you touch those shoes, so then you should be washing your hands. And although the Alter Rebbe uses the lashon hachoylitz min olav, so when you remove the shoes, poskim say it's touching. It doesn't matter whether you're removing them, just touching is also requires netilas yadayim. And on the other hand, if you just slip off your shoes without touching them, then you would not need to do netilas yadayim. And the koyanim, particularly, this is important for them about when they wash their hands for the duchanan, about just slipping off the shoes without touching. So it says that's not a problem, doesn't need netilas yadayim. Very interesting hashgacha protest just this evening. Someone asked me about if he is walking on Shabbos and a stone gets into his shoe. Is he allowed to continue walking? Should he stop and take it out? I said, listen, if you want to dafka continue walking with a stone in your foot in your shoe, that's up to you. But you're not mechuyev to torture yourself, and you'll stop and take it out. So you touch your shoelaces. Yes, you will have to wash netilas yadayim before saying divrei Torah, etc. But fine. Okay. Someone's asking, isn't the point of the glasses to be used as sunglasses? All right, you wear it. I don't think that is totally true. I'll give you a parallel. There's a difference in Lagabi putting on perfume on Shabbos that you shouldn't, that is a question of moilid. But a deodorant, even though it's a perfume deodorant, is not a problem of moilid because your main purpose is the deodorant. The fact that it also adds a new fragrance, that is not a problem. So I'm saying the same thing. You wear glasses if it's photogray lenses. You wear glasses because the optician prescribed you glasses. The fact that it's photogray and it's going to change, that's sort of very, very convenient. But that's not why you're wearing the glasses. And therefore, I think it is derech agav rather than intended. It's not like that spoon, which you dafka using this spoon to be able to test the temperature before you feed the child. Just to finish off, I have in front of me just showing you a sefer, Lekar Kemach HaChodosh, which is a relative contemporary malachit. He talks about slippers, and he says if you're only wearing the slippers inside the house, then he says he thinks that you don't need to wash negelwasser when you touch them. because they're not. The whole thing has got to do with lichluch. It's got to do with the dirt which is picked up when you walk in the street. But if you walk in the house, carpeted floors, etc., then you don't have to worry about lichluch. Right. Let's move on. Someone asked me earlier in the week. Just before I start the next point, someone's asking, after removing shoes, does penetrate, probably a typo, does one need to wash 3 times alternating or just a bit of water? So what we've seen here in the Shulchan Aruch, he says clearly, you don't have to wash 3 times. So that's your answer. You don't need to wash 3 times. If it's convenient and you want to, you wash 3 times, that's a hidur beyond the lifnim mishur sadim. And again, you don't need to wash 3. Let's move on. Next. So we've discussed this a few times about davening Shmona Esrei, and you are in tandem with the Chazan. And then if you do that, you are able to answer Kedusha together with the Chazan. So now the question was, if the Chazan is saying Musaf and you're on for Shacharis, are you able to say Kedusha together with the Chazan? So let's read. It's actually a machlokas mechaber Ramo. So let's read that inside. This is in Siman Kuf Tes in Erechaim. Yochid oimed bitfil. A person who's davening, if you say you're davening Shemona Esrei and they are on for Toivelled, you cannot interrupt your Shemona Esrei to say Kedusha with the tzibur who are on for Toivelled. She'ein HaKedusha is Shabbos, because the Kedusha of Toivelled is not the same as the Kedusha in Shemona Esrei. It doesn't spell out the difference. We've discussed this a while ago. One is Kedusha of them with the Malachim, one is just Yidden without the Malachim. It doesn't go into that. Now, this is written in earlier sources. Says Rabbi Yosef Karo, if the tzibur, if you are on for Shacharis, and the tzibur are saying Musaf, the Chazan is saying Musaf, and therefore they're going to say Keser. The Mechaber was a Sephardi. The Ashkenazim would say Naritzcha. So he says, no, you cannot say Kedusha in Shacharis when they are saying Kedusha of Musaf, because there's a different Kedusha. Ela Yishtoik, Yichavin L'Masha Oimrim, just fall silent, and you'll answer in Machshava, the Shemea Ko'ina. So this is the Mechaber, that's the larger block writing. V'yesh Oimrim, Hagov, V'yesh Oimrim. Then the Ramo, who is the codifies the Minhag Ashkenaz. He says the Kedushas Keser, the Hainu Kedushas Musaf, V'hayochid Mispal Shacharis. Others disagree, and they say that even though the Chazan is saying Kedushas Musaf and you are davening Shacharis, Yuchal Loimer Imohim, you are able to join with them. The Shneihem Kedushas Shmoina Esrei, or Kedushas and Shabbat. So what the Ramo is saying, no, I'm sorry. He's saying that Shacharis and Musaf, the Kedusha is the same Kedusha. And then the Ramo concludes that that's my opinion. The main thing, Halocho, is that you can answer Kedusha in your Shacharis and they are on for Musaf. So now that's, and indeed the Alter Rebbe passes this way in Siman Kuf Tes. So then the question is, what do you say? Do you say Keser or Naqdishach? You are in the middle of Shacharis. So are you going to say Keser or Naqdishach? So the Alter Rebbe doesn't spell out this point, but the Mishnah Berurah does. Loi mari mohem. So Mishnah Berurah adds, V'yoyim akol hanusach shel Keser oy naritzcha. Ashkenaz or Sephardi, respectively. She'oyim ashliach tzibur b'musaf. V'zeh mikri inyan echad. Having laid down that the Kedusha of Shacharis and Musaf is inyan echad, so then it doesn't matter whether you're saying Keser or Naqdishach. It's all the same. The main thing is the Kodesh and Baruch, etc., and that's identical. So he's saying that you'd say whatever the Chazan is saying, which is very interesting, and especially becomes interesting on Shabbos. Well, obviously Musaf is usually on Shabbos. That there's all the extra pieces which are said And he seems to be saying you just do whatever the tzibur is saying, although you are currently in Shacharis, but the main part is identical, and that's the main thing. Okay, let's move on. Let's just mute this little TR. Right, so a lady contacted me. She's obviously having decorators in the house, and the mezuzah, this is an interior mezuzah, as you can see, it's between two rooms, and the mezuzah had been at the extreme edge of the post, the doorpost, and aesthetically it would be looking much nice if it was in the middle. So she's asking, does it have to be at the edge, or can it be placed in the middle? Well, let's see what I have. Something here. Right. So we have here the Lashon HaGemara. The Gemara all about mezuzah is primarily in the main sugya of mezuzah is in Gemara Menachos. There's a little bit in Gemara Yuma, but yeah. So here it says, Tefach hasamach l'shus harabim. It says the mezuzah should be placed in the outermost tefach, closest to the street. Kama de marchik mali. The further out it is, the better. Now, so that's the Lashon of the Gemara. Tefach hasamach l'shus harabim. No, you can argue that's to the street. Here's an interior doorway. Now, but then the way it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch and Simaresh Peites, Eizehu mokain kviyos sebaseicha, betefach hasamach l'chutz. So the Shulchan Aruch has changed. Instead of tefach hasamach l'shus harabim, it's the outermost tefach. It doesn't matter, but the evidence is kosher, but it's outermost tefach. Now, this question, though, coming back to the story here, this question about the mezuzah, let's go back. There we are. Okay, so this question is dealt with length in the Sefer Minchas Elazar. Minchas Elazar was a Muktzah probably about 90 years ago. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe had a great appreciation for the Muktzah. And so the Muktzah addresses this question, and he says, no, it has to be at the Tefach HaSamuch. He says that even in an interior doorway, the mezuzah should not be in the middle, it should better be at the closest edge. And let me just argue the point. If you say, I mean, we're not disputing that the mezuzah is kosher over here. All right, let's explain a little bit more. Why is there an emphasis the mezuzah should be samach l'shus harabim? Because we want to be able to have the protection. The mezuzah gives protection, and therefore we want to maximize the protection of the mezuzah. So therefore we put it tefach samach l'shus harabim to maximize the protection for the house, for the interior. So the argument was that in interior mezuzah, all right, so if you put the mezuzah in the middle of this post, but then it's still the outer part of the doorway is protected by the mezuzah from the outer room. That's I can see the logic. And the Muktzah in his tshuva, he says, some tzaddik in his region had said that it's okay to put the mezuzah in the middle, and that's the argument, that the mezuzah from this point onwards will be protected from this mezuzah, until that point will be protected from the mezuzah from the previous room. I'm asking you a question. The mezuzah is kosher where it is, yeah? So this is called Pesach. You have to make up your mind. If it's Pesach, then it belongs to the next room. So, once you agree that even the outermost space is Pesach, so then Pesach belongs to the room where it's leading to. And therefore that's the Muktzah's argument. He has a few pages. That's in Chelik Aleph, and in Chelik Beis again, he comes back to it in a couple of Simonim, and he insists that even an interior mezuzah should be b'tefach hasamuch to the outer room. And I mean, the aesthetics are going to be a victim of that psak, but what's coming on? Okay, let's take a look at what people have in the chat here. Would there be a way to say kedusha when in birchas krishma kodesh? Well, when you are on Birchas Krishma, you should be mafsik to answer Kedusha. I think your question is, if you are on for Shem HaKel HaMelech HaKodesh, and you want to say the Kodesh in your Shema, in Yotzam Oiris, you want to use that and to join with the Chazan, and then say Ha'ifanu Mechayis HaKodesh was the Chazan saying Musaf. I think that's okay. What you're seeing here is in middle of Shmoyne Esrei. In middle of Shmoyne Esrei, when you're not allowed to be mafsik, he says you can't say Kedushas of Tzion. But if you are in middle of your Birchas Krishma and you want to kind of align your Kedusha of Birchas Krishma with the Kedusha of the Tzibur, I don't see that as a problem. Someone is asking, should the Mezuzah be completely diagonal? Yes, of course, that's the Minhag Ashkenazim, to put the Mezuzah diagonal, as you see in the picture, yes. We make a point that Mezuzah should be diagonal. To be so the two shittas, one says that Mezuzah should be vertical, one says it should be horizontal. So that's why we put a diagonal, so to be to kind of make both shittas happy. And that's the same reason why we have the bima in shul is also made diagonal, because some people say the Sefer Torah should be held vertical, as in the case of the Sephardic Sefer Torah is vertical. Some say it should be horizontal. So as a compromise, we have the bima made at a slant. By the way, it's also more comfortable for reading. For once you get a little bit older, it's easier to read when things are at a slight angle. Okay, let's move on. Tuesday we had a beautiful chasana, and I was Tuesday. So after the chasana, been busy, and I went down to shul to have a coffee and some Mezonos. There happened to be 3 wafers left, and there were plenty of these tea biscuits. As it happens, that very morning, I had given a shiur. I have a weekly shiur for ladies, Tuesday morning, and we had been learning Perek Yud of Birchas Hanehenin about, and it talks about priority for brocha. Then this, if you're going to say one brocha, but there's 2 items which you're going to eat by virtue of this brocha, and which item is given the priority. Then there's also when you have 2 brochas, which brocha comes first. But meanwhile, this question about the one brocha. And it has a discussion there about sholem and chaviv. It's a complicated siman, and so I sat down to my cup of coffee, and before I could make a bracha, I think, wait a minute, which one am I going to make a bracha on? On the wafers, which are more tasty. I beg mechila from the tea biscuits, but the chocolate wafers are more tasty. So that's chaviv. But then the biscuit is sholem, because the wafers, as you see, they come in big sheets and they cut into slices. So you have here a conflict or a question between, to have to decide between sholem and chaviv. So before having my coffee, I had to pull out the Shulchan Aruch, the Siddur, and see, and so I'm going to share that with you, yeah? So that you shouldn't be tortured by the same worries. Okay, so here we have 2 halochos, which I've selected. This is Perek Yud, as you can see, and one is if you have 2 pieces of bread. One is a whole loaf, a small roll, a whole roll, and the other one is a chunk, a slice. So then there is a mitzvah min hamuvcher. It is preferred, recommended to make the brocha on the whole one rather than on the slice. Goes even further. Even if the whole one is pas kiber, it's a dark loaf, and a black bread, whatever, and it's a small one. And the chunk, which is it's nikio, it's white, it's left over from your Shabbos chalas. It's a big one, and it's white flour, and it's geschmacker, and still the quality of shleimus overrides the quality of chaviv. Now, if that's not clear enough, we go down a little bit further, where we have a variety of fruit, and none of them are shivas haminim. And if between the fruit which you're going to eat, one is more chaviv than the others, then again mitzvah namuvcher to make the bracha on the one which you prefer. But he adds, if the chaviv, if the one which you prefer is not sholem, and there are other fruits which are sholem, shleimim in Hebrew, So then, mitzvah min hamuvcher levorach ala shalom. So here we see very clearly that if you've got a toss-up between something which is sholem, not so tasty, and something which is more tasty but not sholem, so then the priority is given to the sholem. So therefore the biscuit got the biscuit rather than the wafer. Now, before I'm looking at the chat, I got a message from someone in Eretz Yisrael who was on Shabbos, was given a fruit salad, and in the fruit salad there were from Shivas Aminim. There were also some Hadomo. There were also bananas which had kedushas shavias. And to eat from Shemitah fruit, that's a special privilege, to eat a kedushas shavias. So it's a very interesting question. I didn't have a chance to look into it, but I just find the Hashgacha protest so interesting. We're going to talking about Krima Bibroches. And so I'm not going to answer because I might get it wrong. Yeah. Later on in the same simon, it talks about when you have two brachas. You have eight and hadomo, and the hadomo is chaviv. Then you're going to put the hadomo before the ha'etz. But I'm going to leave that as an open question. Right. So someone's asking on the chats. You're pointing out about the mezuzahs. Very few people put the mamish 45 degrees. Mostly they're more vertical than horizontal. That is true. Yeah. My coffee did not get cold because Baruch Hashem had learned the halacha in the morning, so it was just a quick refresher. Why are the wafers not shleima? They are made to be separated, like a big separable challah. I don't think so. The challahs are made to be they are made separate, and they sometimes get stuck together by accident, so to speak. Here it's made one big sheet and it's cut up. I don't see it as a shleima. On that principle, would you be yotze lechem mishnah, since the challahs have joined, they have to be separate? Aren't the wafers like that? No, I don't think so. I think that the challahs there are made as separate loaves, and there's a little incidental, unintended sticking together. I don't think it's the same. I want to share with you, though. I usually now Friday night in shul, I share the points for this shiur, so it's a bit of a rehearsal, and it also enriches. So, making about brocho on a sholem. So, Rabbi Edelweiss is one of our neighbors, and one of the Dayanim in the Kadasha, in the union, deals with one department, and he told over a very interesting thing. He told it in the name of a Rav Ganachovsky, who was, I believe, from the Gera community, very prominent Talmid Chochem. He says the following: if you have two pieces of cake, one has got sesame and one doesn't have sesame, so you have a shiur to make the brocha to give priority to the cake with the sesame, because the sesame is sholem. On the sesame you're making very minimum Mezonos, not very priyadama, but it still requires a brocha. You can't eat a sesame without a brocha, and therefore, since you got two pieces of challah or whatever, according to him, you have two challahs, one is sesame, one not sesame. So then you have to make a priority to make the brocha on the sesame. If you're going to eat both challahs, if you're not going to eat both, then it doesn't apply. I find it very, very interesting, because my impression is we're talking about chashivas. According to him, if you have a fruit cake and a regular plain cake, and in the fruit cake there's a whole raisin, so you have to give priority to the one with the whole raisin because it's a shalom. I don't see it that way, because I think the raisin or the sesame is clearly not choshev. It is here as to enhance the challah, to enhance the cake. It's a toffel, it's not an ikar. Here we're talking about giving priority, which is more choshev. I don't see how something which is toffel can kind of tip the weight to say, therefore it becomes more choshev. If it is inherent, whatever the word is, it is in a toffel state, and therefore I don't see why it should dictate the brocha. Okay, perhaps we're going to leave about the splitting the challahs for another time. I want to share with you part of the conversation last night. there is a lashon Gadol hanene miyagiyoi yoisa miyirei shamayim. Greater is the one who benefits from the toil of his hands than the one who is God-fearing. That's a lashon Chazal. And so I've seen in Meforshim, they say the following. If you don't know the halacha, so you're going to be machmir. If you learn through the halacha properly, so then if you are able to establish the halacha that it's okay, that's greater than being machmir in your ignorance, not to use it. So I had a personal experience. You know, when matzahs, you get your matzahs and there's a chip off the corner. Edge. It's the Shemona matzahs. But it's a little chip of the edge. Is it shalom or not? There's a nice 1 out of 48 from Chas Erevin. So I had seen people taking the matzahs and going over to the stove and singeing the edge of the matzah, and then it becomes black at the edge, and it becomes a shalom again. So for years, I'd taken the attitude that it was a Baba Maisa. It wasn't a serious thing. But one year, a couple of weeks before Pesach, I went through this halacha carefully, and I saw indeed that this is, in Yiddish, it's ausgehalten. In English, authentic. That it does work. That to kind of rehabilitate your chipped matzah by singeing it, it does work. But the Eibishter had it that year. The majority of my matzahs were chipped, so I was nene miyagiyoi, and I was able to use those matzahs as shleimus, having gone through the halacha more carefully. I'm just sharing it with you because it could be, I'm not wishing it upon anyone, but sometimes you get this frustrating pack of matzahs and shvura after, lots of shvarim. Okay, let's go on to another question. Is cheating in exam, is it a sin? So here is a tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and it looks like someone had been come up with a story that in the Frum schools that they were allowing the pupils to sneak have sneak access to the answers to the regions, which is like the equivalent of O levels, A levels, whatever we call them over here, GCSEs, and in that way they would get higher marks, etc. So at the end of the tshuva, which is not on the screen, Reb Moshe says it's absolutely not true. It's not true, and it looks like some people are just trying to disparage the reputation of the Frum schools. But meanwhile, addressing the actual issue of cheating. So he says it's not only dina de malchus is it forbidden. My mouse. Okay. Not only is it dina de malchus forbidden, and it says it's also midin Torah. It's forbidden to do so. So first of all, he says a question of gnevas das, which is also forbidden. And we'll come to gnevas das soon, as he gives us a reference to Chulin Daf Tzadik Daled. You're not allowed to deceive people, even a Yehudi. Then it's gnevas das of everyone. It's gnevas das of Eden and Nicht Eden. Then he goes on. It's gnevas dover mam. She says simply, you'll go to school and you'll come out with a good degree from high school. As a result, you'll be able to get a better job. Now you go and let's say hire yourself out as accountant, whatever it may be, and according to your qualifications, you're entitled to pay of $15,000 a year. This is going back in the 40 years ago. A lot of money then. But really, according to your real qualifications, you're only entitled to $10,000 a year. So you are deceiving your employer to give you $5,000 more than you actually that your value, that your work is worth. So he sees that as a gneva in addition to gnevas das. That the same approach is also written in the Sefer Mishnah Halochos from Rabbi Menashe Klein, who lived in Borough Park. He also takes the same view that if you pretend to be more qualified than you are, then that's gneva more than not only gnevas das. But meanwhile, let's look at the union of gnevas das. Let's go to the next slide, where Moshe Feinstein had given us a reference to Gemara. The Omer Shmuel, that was Chulin Daf Tzadik Daled, also lignev das habriyos, not allowed to mislead people. And that's brought in Shulchan Aruch. I think it's Siman Reish Chof Ches. Also, you're not allowed to deceive people in trade. Let's say there's something wrong with what you're selling, some blemish. You'd have to tell your customer that. And then he goes further. Even if it's a goy, you should not sell him meat which from an animal which was not shechted, and he thinks that you're selling him shechted meat. And for the goy, it makes no difference, and still you're not allowed to deceive him. And then he says various other examples of not deceiving people, giving them a false impression. And this is from the Shulchan Aruch, I think it's Reish Chof Ches. And then we have here from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, Hilchos Einor. Let's read it carefully. So before going further, the point of Reb Moshe is an exam which makes a difference for a job, etc. That would be a question of Gneva Mamish. But if it's an exam which is just monitoring how your student is progressing, so I don't think there'll be a question of Gneva Mamish, but Gneva's Das would still apply. So let's read this piece in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. Even if there's no loss to the guy, also Medivrei Sefer. The same thing, so selling Psar Nevela, and he thinks it's Shchuta. And then he says further, to do various acts that they think that, say a customer comes in, oh, for you, I'm going to open this barrel. You're going to open the barrel in any case. So you're giving them an impression that you're being very generous to them, and that's an unearned, how do you say, an accolade which is unearned. That would be going into Gnevas Das. So that what we're seeing here is that to acquire for yourself a prominence which is not really deserving, that would go into Gnevas Das. Who is the victim? Well, who is there? Does it need to be a victim for Gnevas Das? Possibly. Gneva means there's a victim, but you have a teacher, you have other pupils. And the case which I was asked about was one girl who doesn't cheat, and she says that many others in her class do cheat, and they get very high marks, and she gets a lower mark. All right, listen, the true marks are given by the Rebbeinu Shloim, and he knows who gets what, and so don't worry about it. Right. Let's move on. So here on Tuesday night, I got a message on my email from Shliach in Eastern Europe, and he asks, he struggles for a minyan, and he happens to be in a place where lots of crews of shochtim come from Eretz Yisrael, and they do shchitas there. And they're there for the week, and then they go back to Israel. Meanwhile, they come to the Beis Chabad, and they daven there, and make up his minyan. So there's 8 shochtim, shomrim, and there's the shliach. And number 10 is a local Jew who's married to a non-Jewish woman, has some children from her. He comes to the Beis Chabad regularly. And one of the shochtim heard, a person's married to a non-Jewish woman, you're making mitzaref to a minyan. How can you do that? So he was asking for what's my take on it. So I wrote back to him that in the Chazan Ish, he says that if a person who's a Mechal Shabbos B'farhesia has an accident, let's say, on Shabbos, so we have to be Mechal Shabbos to save this person's life. We cannot say he's not Mishelonu, even though he's a Mechal Shabbos B'farhesia, and he uses the principle of Tinik Shenishbo, that he's like a child who was brought up in ignorance, and he says you're Mechal Shabbos to save this person's life. So I wrote back to the Shliach, I says, listen, for Chilul Shabbos, you're saying this fellow does count as a Jew. And for counting a minyan, you say you can't count him. I found that very difficult to accept. Now, let's go a little more discussion about this. So he sent back to me a a reference to the sefer called Beis Hillel from Reb Hillel of Kolomaya. And this is very, very interesting. Anyone who knows about the name Reb Hillel of Kolomaya, he was one of the most outspoken Magidim in Hungary, going back 150 years ago, perhaps. Very, very, very staunch type of person in about Yiddishkeit, etc. He was asked the Shaila about a village where they had just 10 people, really struggling for a minyan. Two of those people, well, one of them he sells tobacco and cigarettes on Shabbos. Can they join him for a minyan? The other one was known to eat treif when he goes out, when he's traveling, whatever he goes, he'll eat treif something. And Hilo Kolomaya says the one who's selling tobacco on Shabbos, that's Issa Rabbanon. That's not enough to make him considered Chal Shabbos. I did not have a chance to look this up. The discussion about this is in Yudedea Simon Beis, and Alter Rebbe has it also in Chas. If I'm not mistaken, there he says that even if it's Mechal Shabbos, the Rabban is also not Mitzaref Termini. Well, he's also considered Kanach Lechal Dover. But meanwhile, this is what I read in Rebbe Hillel Kolomaya's answer. He told them that they could use him for a minyan, and the one who eats treif is he's not very, not appropriate for you to eat treif, but that doesn't disqualify him from a minyan. Fine. And now let's take a look over here. So we have here in Siman Nun Hey, a person has violated Gzeres HaTzibur, and if there hadn't been a formal nidui, he can be still counted for a minyan. A menuda, you can't count for a minyan. So here's this point where there's a discussion. So in the Tshuvas Minchas Yitzchok, he does take the view that you cannot, a person is married to a guy, you can see on the right, this is Tshuvas Minchas Yitzchok, Chelik Gimel Siman Samachei. He holds a person married to a non-Jewish woman is not able to be counted for a minyan. This goes back. He's drawing back from the Chacham Tzvi. Chacham Tzvi lived about 350, 400 years ago in Holland, and he was dealing with the people who had fled from the Spanish Inquisition. There were some of them who refused to have a bris, and he says you cannot give them an aliyah, you can't count them for a minyan. And he also talks about those who are married to non-Jewish women. Also, you can't count them for a minyan. Now, why is this worse than any other avera? So, as you said, I just quoted that if a person eats treif, you can still count it for a minyan. Why is marrying out worse? So let's read the words of the Minchas Yitzchok. So he says, yeah, you've got various reasons. This Shiva of Minchas Yitzchok was written to a Rov in Belfast, probably about 50 years ago. And he says, other things you can say is a tinnik shenishba. But when it comes to Nisui Nochris, marrying out, Ein Rov Yisrael Nichshalim Bozeh. Most Eden will not fall for this, and therefore one has to block the peretz, the breach, whatever is possible. And he quotes a sefer Zichron Yehuda, I think was in Hungary. You can't give an aliyah to one who's married, who's living with a shiksa, etc. Having said that, I think there's a massive difference between the community as it was in the times of Chacham Tzvi or in the times of the Minchas Yitzchok 50, 60 years ago, and in England. And here we're talking about somewhere in Eastern Europe where probably the intermarriage rate is higher than 90%. I'm sure that's the case. And so this whole approach, the Ein Rov Yisrael Nichshalim Bozeh, would be true in a community where such a thing is a rarity. Then you could take that view of saying that you shouldn't give them an aliyah. But when it comes to a kind of an area where that is not the statistic, then that shouldn't be a reason not to give an aliyah. Forget it's come to shul, so you give them an aliyah. I see Rabbi Cohen is writing here. Many shuls do not give aliyah to married out. As is seen as endorsement. Saving his life is not. Yeah. So I think you're coming from an established community, and I think there the Minchas Yitzchok's words would be true. In a in a more established community, you could use that principle, Ein Rov Yisrael Nechshalim Bozeh, and also sometimes, very often, the term of Tinik Shenishba is not true, because they know that intermarriage is a no-no. But if you're talking about somewhere in this place in Eastern Europe, this person was brought up far from Yiddishkeit, as was most of the Yidden in his country, and therefore to say that I think the term Tinik Shenishba would be applicable there. And I just want to add a thought here, that there's this famous Gemara, Misherobu ha-rotzchim, Misherobu ha-manafim, the end of Sota, when there were so many people who were behaving promiscuously, so then the Mayim Hamorim stopped working. The water stopped checking whether they are disloyal to their husbands, etc. Misherobu ha-rotzchonim, when there became too many murderers, so the Sanhedrin moved away from their proper seat and went to some kind of storefront, whatever that makes a difference. But you see, the point is that you can punish a minority, you can punish an aberration, but you cannot use punishment when it's such a widespread problem. There you're going to have to be more creative, find ways of education, but your punishment doesn't work. That's my take on it. So, of course, those communities where they take such a stance, well, yeah, it's obviously because they see that as being a method which is working, etc. Let's have one more, Tyler. Okay, here I have a shtickle problem that is the following. On a pair of tefillin, we have the right hand. Well, we have here the yud. We have the knot. This is the right hand person puts the tefillin on the left, and here we have the yud. And so that's the shape of the yud. That's the block of the yud, and that's the little spike, which is the foot of the yud. The question is, how do you do the kesher for a lefty? So the rest of the kesher, you'll do a mirror image. But here's the question. The mirror image of what I've just pointed you on the left of our screen, on the right of the screen, the bottom right, we have here a mirror image. Now that is a mirror image of a yud. Is that a yud? Does that count as a yud? So that's a big question. Now, if you're going to do a regular yud, so then you're going to have the brown part of the ritzua visible to the outside, and that's also not okay, because it says, the more beautiful side should be visible to the outside. Now here, so that to make the kesher the way you see it with seeing the brown side of the ritzua is also not really a valid option. Well, it's questionable. The third option is, well, perhaps to make the yud, but the yud will actually be sitting, lying on its upside down. Well, that's the picture which you have over here. So it's the contemporary Sforim do discuss this. It seems to be that the mirror image is the more popular way, but there are those who say no, to actually do a proper yud. What I have here on the screen is there's a list of answers of Radam Shimon Dvorkin Shalom in relation to Shacharis, and he writes the following. Well, this is quoted from him: the yud of the tefillin of a lefty should be done yosher, veloi betsura hafucha. So the yud should be a proper yud and not a back to front yud. I mean, that's the way I understand it. You could say it means it shouldn't be an upside down yud. It's a little bit ambiguous, so I don't know what the full answer is. I want to just finish off with some windy shilas, and that is, well, if the wind knocked down a fence between you and your neighbor, then you may have an issue of continuing to carry in your back garden. If the gap between the two gardens is more than 10 amos, then you would not be allowed to carry in your garden unless you made an Erev before Shabbos. And just to finish off, there's a word that Groening was a mashpia in Lubavitch, and he used to give a mashal about a bird who was very hungry, and it's sitting on top of a mountain, and it's saying, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. The Abraham made a wind and picked up the bird and put it right next to the water. And the bird is still saying, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. So he said to him, bird brain, dip your head into the water and drink. You're now here. So he's saying he used to say, welcher wind hat dich gebracht in Lubavitch? Which wind picked you up and landed you in Lubavitch? But now you're in Lubavitch, you have to dip your mouth into and drink from the limud and from the avoida, etc. And Bez Hashem. Okay, gute Woche and seid alle gesund, and we should meet in good health.
Good Woche, shkoyach.
Good Woche, yeah, shkoyach.
Thank you very much.
God.
Good
Good Woche.